welcome to the Life of the Troxels. Today I wanted to share every book that I read this year. It turns out I read 21 books, and that's kind of surprising to me because I think last year I probably read 2 books. So I've really been enjoying getting back into reading, which I would consider one of my very limited hobbies that I have. So I'm not a booktuber. I don't share books generally, but I thought it would be interesting as a normal person just to share books with friends like you would, just talk about them, and maybe you'll find something that you would want to add to your reading list, or maybe I can give some suggestions on books you don't want to add to your reading list. I've really been getting back into reading and I'm really enjoying getting back into reading, and so I'm excited to share some of these books that I've read. So I have a pile here. I also got some from the library. I had some on my Kindle, and I'll just share literally no ranking of them. It's just going to be the order that I read it, January to December. This is the first one that I finished in 2024. It's actually a Christmas book. Wow, I didn't even say the title of it. I'm very good at this. So, the Enchanted Sonata, and it is a Christmas themed book where there's like some magic flutes and the character turns into like a nutcracker and has to like save Christmas basically. It's a young adult book, really fast read. Literally don't read it for anything, just the vibes. So the next one is called Screaming on the Inside, and it's about being a mother in America and kind of some of the problems that come along with that, you know, involving childcare expenses and career sacrifices and things along those lines. It was very scholarly, if that makes sense. It almost kind of read like a term paper that she turned into a book, which is fine, but it just wasn't very entertaining. And then I wrote that I finished it, but I'm realizing that I actually still have like a spot saved in it, so I don't even know if I finished it. I'm not going to be going back to finishing it, but just an interesting little... was it even interesting? That's the thing. Just about motherhood in America, and that's what I am, a mother in America. The next one I read was the Britney Spears memoir, and I asked for this for Christmas last year, so I was really excited to read it and get through it. I feel like what I'm going to say about this book is what everyone else says about it, which is it could really have used an editor. There were a lot of paragraphs, a lot of portions of it that could have been cut down in certain ways. I mean, I can see why they left it in there because it's her story and she wrote it the way that she wanted, but it wasn't it wasn't a page turner. It took me a while to get through it, although I was glad that I read it when I was done. So next is The Midnight Library, and I was really excited about this one. Even on the back of it says it's a feel-good book guaranteed to lift your spirits. That is a straight up lie. There is nothing feel-good about this book. It's about a girl who's depressed, and then she goes into this library, like, you know, in the in-between of the afterlife, and sees all the different lives that she could have led. And basically all of the lives are horrible, and it really did not leave me feeling good at the end of it. It turns out Goodreads, this was like one of their top 10 books of the year, and I was like, who's rating it this? Because I don't know. I liked the idea of it, but it kind of fell flat for me. There was a lot of potential here. So after reading after reading all of those books, Britney Spears and then The Midnight Library, none of them were that great, and so I was kind of getting into a reading slump, and I asked my friend, I was like, I want to read The Hunger Games for the first time again, because that is just such an amazing series and I love it. And so she actually recommended to me this series, and it's based on some of the fairy tales of like Cinderella, so fairy tale princess fairy tales, but it's also kind of dystopian future. And this was exactly what I needed to get out of that slump. Like I said, Cinderella story, but then it's dystopian future as well. And it's a full series. There's like 4 books in the series and I loved it. It's YA, super easy to get through, but like exactly what I needed at that moment. What I asked for was The Hunger Games meets Meg Cabot, and Meg Cabot's the author of Princess Diaries, so I want a Hunger Games meets Princess Diaries. This delivered. Here we go, only for the summer. This is a very popular book on like Booktube and Book Talk and everything, and I even have a vlog of me reading it, and just like it's really hit the spot. I read it in the summertime, so it kind of fit those vibes. Very fun book to read. It was like a romance, but it had a lot of depth to the characters. And I really like this author. I want to read more from her. I like her like writing style. It was a romance, but it had a lot of other elements into it that made it a little more meaningful. And then another kind of summer book is the Unhoneymooners, and it's about these 2 people who are at a wedding, and they weren't the ones that got married, but they were the only 2 that were able to go on the honeymoon for whatever reason. And it's set, the honeymoon's in Hawaii, so it's got that like tropical summer kind of vacation feel. Very cute book. Didn't wow me. This author, actually it's 2 people, 2 authors. It was nice. It was like a feel-good book, just kind of average run-of-the-mill story. Based on how it started, I didn't have high hopes for it, but I ended up liking it more once it was done. It was good. It wasn't great. So the next one I have on my list was a library book. It was called The Candy House, and this was my first official did not finish book on this list, and I wanted to include it just because I'm like, I had tried to read it and I really hated it. It had 2 main characters. Actually, I think it had more, but I didn't even get introduced to the other ones because the 2 that I was introduced to, I absolutely hated. And I was like, I do not want to spend any more time with these characters. And so I just put it back in the library and was like, I'm never gonna think of these people again. It was actually a booktuber that recommended it to me, and then I hated it that bad that I'm like, I will never go back and find another recommendation from this person. And I am not opposed to DNFing or like did not finishing a book. My time is precious. I do not want to spend it being miserable. I read as an escape. I read for fun. I read to not be hating myself. I'm like, why am I spending time doing this? And my mom is not like that. She would be horrified to find out that I did not finish reading a book that I started because she insists on doing that. And I was like, but if I'm not enjoying it, I'm not going to waste my time on it, because I'm not going to feel better having read a book that I hated. That's just not, it's not going to make me feel better. I'm going to feel better not having to read that book anymore than I already did. And that is not the only book that I DNF'd this year. So then we move to Scarlet, which is the next book in the Cinder series, and this one's actually about Little Red Riding Hood's story, and it wasn't as good as the first one, but it definitely was a good way to kind of continue on with that storyline. And I haven't had a chance to read any further onto these, but this is something that I'm going to look into for next year. Yeah, they're pretty long, so it'll take me a while to get through the rest of them, but I do want to finish this series. The next one I actually read on my Kindle, and it's called Down the Rabbit Hole, and it's Holly Madison's memoir. And she was one of Hugh Hefner's main girlfriends for a while, and a Playboy bunny, and tells her story about all of that. And her memoir was exactly what I wanted Brittany's memoir to be. And she had a much better, editor, much better writing style. I thought it flowed a little bit better, and I really got to know her and like her thought process through like that time in her life, and a little bit of the secrets of like the Playboy Mansion. And that was definitely one that I wanted to keep reading and finding out what happens next, and it was just really fascinating for me. And then as soon as I was done reading it, I went to watch Girls Next Door, which is the series that she was on, like the TV series. She was like the original reality TV series, and it's on Amazon Prime. So I just, after I finished reading the book, I went and watched that. Another one I got here, I actually found it at Goodwill when I picked it up, and it's Book Lovers by Emily Henry. And Emily Henry is another really popular author online, romance author. This one I really liked. I've actually read some other Emily Henrys since then, and this is still probably one of my favorites. And I don't know if it's ruined me because it was my first one. Like, is this gonna be my favorite one because it's the first one, or if it's like really my favorite? It's just a story about these two people who are in the like publishing industry, and you know, that kind of small town, big city combo together. And I definitely like her writing style, how she writes, like the banter between the characters. So another author that I really come to love this year. All right, so I think this next one is my favorite book of the year, and it is Hello Stranger. And I actually got this as a library book, and then when I finished it, I immediately went out to buy my own copy of it. And I don't keep a lot of copies of books, so it's kind of a big deal that I like had to have a copy of this. And this book was the only book that I read where as soon as I finished it, I wanted to immediately start reading it from the beginning again, because there were so many details that I wanted to kind of piece together. And it's a love story with a woman who has face blindness, which I thought was so interesting. I'd never read anything or heard anything about that. And I don't know if it was that concept or her writing style or whatever it was about this book. It made me cry twice. It had a lot of depth to it. So this one I think is my top contender for the year. Another book that I did not finish is Big Boned, and it's actually a Meg Cabot book, and I've talked about how I really enjoy Meg Cabot. But what was interesting was it was a library book, and I didn't read it fast enough in order to finish it before it was due, and then I didn't like it enough to renew it and keep it for longer. And I'm also like 90% sure that I had read it previously, like in high school or something like that. I know it's part of a series, so I might have read like another book in the series or whatever it is. And I probably would have finished it if I had a copy, but it was just part of the library, and I was just like, you know, it was fine for what I had it, but I don't need to do anything to continue to read it or read any other books in the series. We're starting to get into the books I was reading in October, and I had another one on my Kindle called Cutting Teeth, and I thought it was kind of interesting because it's about kids who like turn into vampires. Not like actual vampires, but they like suck their parents' blood like a vampire would. So it's very much an analogy of how kids take from their parents. But it was very interesting because there was like some crime plot to it, but it was also like a reflection on like motherhood and parenting in general. And I thought it was a lot more interesting as a novel compared to that one book I read at the beginning of the year, which had a lot of the same themes of how much, you know, we give up as parents and how much our kids take from us, or how much like effort our kids take from us. But it was much more enjoyable story and plot to follow. So another kind of library book DNF that I had was called The Wedding Date. So it was a library book on my Kindle, and I know that you can keep them for longer than the due date, but I wanted to download new books, which means I would have had to have lost that one, and I didn't like it enough to delay the new books that I was getting. So again, it was kind of the same situation where I'm like, I just don't like it enough to continue with it and sacrifice like my missing out on these other books that I wanted to read. It was kind of boring, you know. I made it like halfway through and like basically one thing happened, and that was like they met and then they went to this wedding, and I was waiting for like what's coming next, and it hadn't happened by that point, and so I was like, okay, I mean, it's fine. It was a cute little story, but I didn't feel connected enough to the characters to want to finish it. So another one I got on my Kindle was called The Love Hypothesis, and it's by Ali Hazelwood, and I've read another one of her books as well this year. I like her writing style. I feel like she writes dialogue in a way that you would speak in real life compared to how typical book and novel dialogue is written. So it took a little bit of getting used to kind of that style. I thought it was predictable, which is fine when it's a, you know, a romance. And but there was a lot of character growth in it as well. So I'm like, I know some of her books are like considered young adults, and I don't know if that's the case with this one, but it was a cute little story, women in STEM. So actually the next one that I read is another Ali Hazelwood book, and I only picked this up again because it was at Goodwill, so it was only a couple bucks. And I did not like this one as much. This one's definitely a YA. It's about chess, and it's like a love story between them, and I didn't feel particularly connected to anyone or thought that it was like this great new American novel. It was cute. It was fine. I read it because I had a copy of it, but I'm gonna just donate it back to the Goodwill when I'm done. One of the things that I said about this is that I feel like she wrote it for high school students who need to practice their SAT vocabulary, because there's a lot of words in here that she's thrown in that I can tell are like thesaurus words, and I was like, this is a word that you would really only see on like an SAT test. So I'm like, that's how I can kind of tell it's written for like that teenager age. And between the two Ali Hazelwood books that I read this year, I liked The Love Hypothesis better. So another book I read is actually another Abby Jimenez book, and she's became one of my favorite authors this year with the Just for the Summer. And it was a novella, so I guess the difference is just like how many pages it is. I think it was maybe like 120 pages. I don't even think I said the name of it. Like, this is how good I am about doing videos about books. It's called Worst Wingman Ever. Super fast read, a feel-good read. You know, it's kind of a love story, kind of a story about like family, and super easy. I just read it on a road trip and moved on to the next thing. Nothing too memorable. Then the next one I got was another Emily Henry book, and I got it from the library. This one is Funny Story. And I didn't even plan on picking this one up, but my daughter was at the library and she was over by the new editions, you know, the books that the library recently have added to their collection, and that book was there, and it just like stood out to me. And so I was like, I feel like I'm like the first, or if not one of the first people from the library to have checked out this copy. And so I read it and I liked it. I do think I like Book Lovers better than Funny Story. Again, I don't know if it's because I read that one first versus the order that I'm writing it, and I do like the banter that she has between the characters, the love story that she creates. The two main characters were in a relationship and then got broken up with because their significant others started dating each other, and so they kind of were left as like in this limbo point and started getting together themselves, and kind of cheesy, kind of cute. Definitely like her writing, and I will look for some of the other Emily Henry books as well. One of the things I noticed about Emily Henry books is that I do like the story and I like her writing style, but all of the endings kind of fall flat. Like, it's a really great book and then you get to the end and then there's just no like finish. It just kind of ends, and I'm like, I want a little bit more at the end. It leaves me feeling like a little bit lackluster to it, and so none of them, the books that I've read from her so far, have really grabbed me right at the end like Abby Jimenez or Catherine Center's books have. So now we're getting into December and the holiday time, so kind of like how I read Enchanted Sonata earlier in the year, right around Christmas time, I read this year Holiday Romance, and I thought it was very cute because it's a story of these friends who only see each other once a year when they fly back to Ireland to visit their family and sit next to each other on the plane. And they kind of keep in touch, so it's like the story is part modern day, part flashbacks to these other flights that they've had, and then this particular year they have a really rough time going back to Ireland. Based, you know, their flights are canceled, and you can kind of imagine the Hallmark movie plot that comes along with it. But it was very cute, very feel-good, very Hallmark movie plot to have a little bit of the drama, but a little bit of the romance, and kind of watch the relationship develop over the course of the book. A couple things to note. At about the 50% of the way through mark, I was a little bit bored with it, and I didn't really know where it was gonna go. I just was like, is this all that I get? And then when there was about, in the last like 25% of the book, I couldn't put it down. I flew through it. I stayed up late reading it because it really hooked me right at the end. It made me tear up. It was very heartwarming. It definitely had that kind of punch at the end that I was hoping for with the Emily Henry books, and that I finally got with this one. It wasn't very Christmassy necessarily, other than the fact that it took place at Christmas time, but so it didn't really get that like Christmas spirit itch that I was hoping for, but it was still really nice to read. All right, and so my final book is a book that I raced through because I really wanted to finish it before the end of the year so I could include it in this video, and that is Fourth Wing. And again, I read it on my Kindle, and I'm sure you've heard of Fourth Wing at some point in your life, no matter who you are. It is a very popular book, romance slash fantasy book. Personally, ones that I do enjoy reading books like this. It very much reminded me of Divergent, just with Divergent plus dragons. And I definitely liked those stories. And I can see why a lot of people enjoy it. There's a lot of like banter between the characters and like a little bit of a love triangle, and it's very much a coming of age story of like this main character, and so I was very interested in it as a world that I really wanted to find out what happened next. And so I finished it, and as I was going through it, it's a long book. The Kindle version is over 600 pages. Obviously a paperback might be a little bit different, but I remember I was telling Eric, I was almost complaining about how long this book was, but I was like, no, I'm interested in finding out what happens. And we're getting down to the end, have this big action scene right at the end. And in the final 4 lines of the book, the last 4 lines of the book, is the biggest plot twist you never saw coming. Never. There was nothing in the book that would have hinted that this was coming at all. And I sat there and I was like, oh my God. And then I'm like, I want more. I'm like, this book is 600 pages, but I need more pages because I need to know what happens next. That got me so good. The good news is I immediately went and I placed a hold on Libby at my library, and I got the next one, which is called Iron Flame, and and I started reading Iron Flame immediately, and I'm part of the way through that one. And then there is the 3rd book in the series is almost out. It's coming out in January. Now with fantasy books and like the dragon part of it, I wasn't sure I was gonna be into it that much. I knew I liked dystopian, kind of futuristic, but that always seemed like futuristic, while dragons is definitely very like fantasy. But I wanted to see why everyone else liked it so much, and so I definitely wanted to give it a try. But I did the same thing with the Midnight Library, where everybody seemed to really like it, and then we saw how that turned out. That wasn't that great. So I was like, hopefully this one turns out much better. It definitely had a lot of buildup. Obviously you have to have a lot of backstory for it. So it wasn't really until like 50% of the way in where I was like really hooked and wanting to find out what happened next. So that's like 300 pages when this book is 600 pages long. There were 3 main plot twists. Like one of them was like, the first one you're like, yeah, okay, I can kind of see that happening. Like that's not surprising. And I was like 50% of the way through, and then like 70% of the way through was like another plot twist, and you were like, oh, that's a big deal. That's really exciting. And that's the point where I was like, I need to read to the end of this book. And then the final plot twist, like I said, happened on the last page. And that one was completely mind-blowing, like out of left field. Not in like a that's never gonna happen way, but just in a completely unexpected way. And that really, I was like, okay, I can see, I need to know what happens next. I really enjoyed the characters and the world that was in it in the sequel, which is called Iron Flame, and I'm really looking forward to see like where we go from here. So I wanted to say thank you for watching, and hopefully some of these books give you some ideas to add to your list of ones that you want to read. However, I feel like most of them you're going to add to the list of books you don't want to read, because I didn't have very many that were very highly rated. They seemed to be kind of not great or really great. There were a couple that were kind of in the middle. So hopefully some of those really great ones you take my advice and get a copy of from your library and get a chance to read it. And hopefully if reading is a hobby that you're interested in, I hope that you in this next year get a chance to do more of it. Just like I am, I'm really hoping to read more than 21 books next year. Let me know down below in the comments what books you're interested in picking up next and ones that you have on your list, and I will give them a try for 2025. Thanks for watching.